Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This echo is very helpful. Welcome to TEDxAngliaRuskinUniversity. The event is a mere 2 years late, and I'll give you 3 guesses why that is. It's been a lengthy process, one that's been defined by difficulties. If you guys watched the promotional video, you would have heard myself and Anna had a bright idea in typical TED fashion to do something that seemed almost crazy, okay? And that was to host TEDxAngliaRuskinUniversity. 3 years ago, I had the invaluable opportunity to do my own TEDx talk on a topic that meant everything to me, not just a lot, but everything to me, okay? And it was entirely life-changing. I've never been the same person, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It seemed almost criminal at a venue like Anglia Ruskin University to not provide the same opportunity to the people here as well. And so the theme is Destination Tomorrow, and there is a really deep meaning behind it that I will reveal right at the end. I said in the promotional video, and I stand by it, although philosophers like to ask really interesting questions, for the majority of us, tomorrow is somewhat guaranteed. We're all working towards it. My dad has a famous saying. He says to me, we live as if we're never going to not live. And it's very much true. And this thing that we all work towards and we all strive towards, we have absolutely no idea what it's going to look like. And yet, there are ideas, there are plans that will manifest themselves in the future. They are constructing tomorrow as we speak, and that's what today's stage is about. So, without further ado, the first speaker touches on a topic which is very important. In medical school, we learn about psychiatry very deeply. It's an important thing that we talk about. The diseases of the mind and the way a human thinks can completely distort their perception of reality. And sometimes, in very, very difficult scenarios, life sometimes becomes not worth living. And that's the story that this speaker wants to talk about, and the story behind how he overcame that. So please welcome Dr. Farque.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on, is that all the gusto you can muster? I said good morning. That's better. What a blessing it is to be here with you all today. We know that counting our blessings instead of our burdens and populating our gratitude diaries bolsters mental well-being. I'm very fortunate. I often receive invitations to give talks. Now, at this one medical school, the auditorium was literally heaving with students. There was a brother, a fellow man of color, sat in the front row, and I kid you not, he was snorting, and he had saliva drooling down his face. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I need to be able to engage with the students, to educate them. I know. Samuel L. Jackson, rather Jules, I need your help. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Now, blessed is he who, in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of the darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brother. And you will know that I am the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee. I got one thing to say. King Kong ain't got anything on me. Now, if Ezekiel 25:17 from Pulp Fiction doesn't galvanize students, I don't know what will. I wholeheartedly believe that we can harness the colossal power of the performing arts to entertain and engage audiences. And once engaged, we can inspire you to deconstruct and reformulate perceptions of people who have mental health conditions, not based on myths and sensationalism, but based on the facts and on evidence derived from empirical research. I am Dr. Ahmed Hankir. I identify as a wounded healer. I'm both a mental health care provider, an NHS psychiatrist, and a mental health care receiver, a psychiatric patient. I realize that revelation may make people feel uncomfortable. If it does, ask yourself, why? You see, there's this perception that doctors should be invincible. But the reality is that we are human beings, that we are fallible, and we are also vulnerable to developing mental health problems like everyone else. Stigma and a culture of shame are formidable barriers to mental health care services. And consequently, many people, especially doctors with mental health problems, continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. I repeat, many people with mental health problems continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. Now, if that was physical health, there would be outrage. But because it's mental health, there's a deafening silence. Now, I have felt the fire of stigma, so I know firsthand how harmful and hurtful it can be. And so I have decided to dedicate and devote my life to campaigning against stigma and to raising awareness of the egregious effects of stigma. Indeed, the consequences of stigma can be fatal. I will be talking about suicide, which can be triggering, and I cannot emphasize enough, if you are experiencing psychological distress in any of its many forms, the best recourse is to seek professional help. This is Dr. Daksha Emson. She was a loving mother and wife and a brilliant psychiatrist. And she tragically killed herself and her baby daughter, Freya, during a psychotic episode. An independent inquiry into her death concluded that she was the victim of stigma in the National Health Service. Succinctly put, stigma is killing people. Stigma, it's killing people. Now is not the time to be quiet. We must do everything in our collective power to challenge stigma whenever and wherever we see it. How do we reduce stigma? How do we do it? A systematic review and meta-analysis reveal that the most effective way of reducing stigma is through social contact with someone who has a mental health condition. Why? Well, when you meet us, you discover that we are peace-loving, community-serving, law-abiding citizens, and that we have hopes and fears and strengths and vulnerabilities and dreams like everyone else. You discover that we are human beings. And so the evidence is clear. People who have mental health problems have the power to reduce stigma and must spearhead anti-stigma campaigns. We must amplify the voices of experts by experience and harness the colossal power of storytelling to reduce stigma, and to empower, dignify, and humanize people who have mental health conditions. And so this is my story. I will never, ever forget the date, the 10th of July, 2000. I left my family behind me in Lebanon, and the country was ravaged by a brutal conflict that had far-reaching consequences. So there I was in Beirut International Airport, and I don't care if what I'm about to say shatters my masculine bravado. I was crying inconsolably. Toxic masculinity permeates our societies. The male-to-female suicide ratio is 3-to-1. We need to rewrite the narrative on what it means to be a strong man. Expressing your emotions and seeking help are signs of strength regardless of your gender. I arrived in England, and I naively believed that I would just waltz into university and that I would be embraced by the academic community. I graduated top of the school, after all. The reality was that my qualifications from Lebanon were not recognized. So I ended up working as a janitor, cleaning floors, and as a stock advisor, stacking supermarket shelves from when you cannot see in the morning until you cannot see at night. I was working 70 hours a week on minimum wage to put a roof over my head and food in my stomach. The calluses on my hands, evidence of my manual labor. How did I feel? I was 17 years old. Legally speaking, I wasn't even an adult. I was just a kid. My mind was still maturing. My brain was still developing. My heart was still growing. I didn't understand why when I would say good morning to people when I was cleaning floors, people wouldn't say good morning back to me. I saw teenagers my age living with their parents, preparing for their A-levels. I felt melancholic. I mean, of course I did. But I was fully aware that I had been given a decent shot at life, because education in the UK is a birthright, and that is not the reality for many people in this world. And I would admonish myself, if I squandered that golden opportunity, I just had to stay focused and work really, and I mean really hard. And the following year, I enrolled into a sixth form college, and I continued to work full-time hours to survive. And I will never, ever forget when the head of the sixth form at the time asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I said to her it was always my dream to become a doctor. And she laughed in my face, and she didn't have to say it, but she made me feel like I was this dirty little immigrant with delusions of grandeur. She then scoffed, "Choose another course. You'll never get into medical school." Being the sensitive soul that I am, her words hurt me. Her words hurt me a lot. However, I didn't allow her to diminish my resolve. I continued to work hard. I dug deep. And despite the constant threat that being in full-time employment posed, I received straight A grades. And I matriculated into Manchester Medical School. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity, but the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. This I did, the Lawrence of Arabia. In June 2006, when I was a third-year medical student, I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown was bombed and that hundreds of people were killed overnight. My nightmare turned into a reality. My world turned upside down. I saw harrowing and horrific images of dead bodies strewn on the streets of Lebanon, dead babies being removed from the rubble. And I feared that my family were among the dead. And I later discovered they were safe. And I reacted. I was overwhelmed. I felt powerless. And I developed a severe episode of psychological distress. Now, C.S. Myers in The Lancet said that everyone has a breaking point, weak or strong, cowardly or courageous, war-frightened, everyone witless. And in the immortal oratory of the Joker, insanity is much like gravity. All it takes is a little push. How about a full-blown war? What's it like to experience major depressive disorder? Thoughts and feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness permeates your mind like a poisonous fog. The excessive guilt paralyzes you. You ruminate. You are unable to concentrate. Your mind is utterly useless. You are no longer able to conceive and to receive ideas. You have zero energy and motivation. You don't even have the will to get out of bed, let alone live life. This isn't living. This is existing. This isn't living. The somatic or physical symptoms of mental health conditions are disabling. During an anxiety attack, you cannot breathe. I cannot breathe! And the pain in my chest is so excruciating, it reduces me to tears. You develop this sense of impending doom and you are terrified. You are about to die. Debilitating though the symptoms of psychological distress are, the stigma is far, far worse. I was shunned, ostracized, and dehumanized even by those who I thought were my closest companions. At the time when I needed care and compassion the most, I received ridicule and rejection. I was forced to interrupt my studies. I was rendered impoverished and hopeless and homeless. And I was sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness. And in my despair and isolation, I contemplated ending that which is most precious itself, human life. However, I resisted the urge to act upon these seductive suicidal thoughts because suicide is forbidden in Islam. And being a practicing Muslim deterred me from ending my life. My faith was a protective factor. I eventually sought informal support from my imam in my local mosque, and he urged me to seek professional help from an NHS psychiatrist, which is what I did. And together we co-produced a treatment plan. There is so much pill shaming, and I think that is wrong. Many report psychiatric drugs are life-saving, but medication is not a panacea, and there are adverse effects which can be intolerable, unbearable, and we must be clear about this. The psychiatric drugs work for so many others, but they didn't work for me. It's not a bio model of mental health. It's a biopsychosocial model that incorporates art therapy. And it was the power of the performing arts that saved me from suicide. Expressing my emotions through the vehicle of the performing arts was validating, therapeutic, and cathartic, and contributed to my mental health recovery and continues to contribute to my mental health resilience. I remember when I received an invitation to perform at the International Anthony Burgess Foundation in Manchester back in 2008. This was during my recovery and discovery. It was the first time that I performed on a stage. I cannot explain it. I was beholden to the spur. I felt the urge to recite poetry or reenact scenes from films from Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night, but rage against the dying of the light. And though they go mad, they shall be sane. Though they sink through the sea, they shall rise again. Though lovers be lost, love shall not, and death shall have no dominion. To Blade Runner, I have seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire, off the shoulder of Orion. I watch sea-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will disappear like these tears in the rain. To the dark night. Oh! So you think the darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. But then it was nothing but blinding to me. Your shadows betray you because they belong to me. Through the medium of the performing arts, I could convey the rage, the pathos, the despair, the hope, the exuberance that I experienced whilst at the throes of profound oscillations and moods. I didn't develop adverse effects, and I didn't feel judged. I could connect with others. After I was forced into isolation for so long, I felt alive again, and it was the most wonderful, wonderful feeling. I gradually recovered, and I resumed medical school with a renewed determination. There was a fire burning in my belly and thunder in my heart to realize my potential and to make important and meaningful contributions to our world. And against all the odds, I finally qualified. But my journey had only just begun. For I had been humiliated for so long, and I was inspired to work above and beyond the call of duty. And all the hard work and all the heartache and all the suffering and all the sacrifices paid off. Because from leaving my family behind me when I was 17 years old, to arriving to the UK, to cleaning floors, to stacking shelves, to getting into medical school, to experiencing severe psychological distress triggered by the Lebanon war, to being forced to interrupt my studies, to being rendered impoverished and hopeless and homeless, to recovering, to resuming medical school, to qualifying. In 2013, I received the Royal College of Psychiatrists Foundation Doctor of the Year Award, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists Awards mark the highest level of achievement in psychiatry in the UK. Not bad for a madman, right? It was one of the proudest moments of my life. And just in case people thought I was lucky, I went and I did it again. And I got the Royal College of Psychiatrists Doctor of the Year Award in 2018. And my story is further evidence to prove that people who have mental health conditions can not only recover and function again, we can be the best at what we do. And now, whenever I'm at the workplace and someone says good morning to me, regardless of if they are a professor or a janitor, I always say good morning back to them with a big smile on my face and in my heart. And I will close with these take-home messages. That it's okay not to be okay. That having mental health problems is nothing to be ashamed about. That seeking help is a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. That recovery is the reality for the many and not for the few. And I invite you to stand in solidarity with us to reduce stigma and to contribute to this cultural revolution, to empower, dignify, and humanize people who have mental health conditions. If I can recover and realize my dreams, other people out there with mental health conditions can recover and realize their dreams too. Thank you.
What a story. I think what I enjoy about Dr. Hanke's story is when we're thinking about the future, it reminds us to just contemplate where we are, actually, and take care of ourselves in the moment, because, yeah, stigma is out there, and we mustn't let it define tomorrow, wherever that is, and we've taken our first step. I think that's a good one to start with. The next people who are talking, are talking about something really interesting, artificial intelligence. So we've gotten to the level where we've produced something that is more intelligent than us. A lot of people say that's a testament to our innovation. I say it's a testament to just how lazy we are, I think. That's my personal opinion. And what if we could solve the global education crisis with a teacher on an iPhone or Android? Please welcome the amazing Dr. Paul the Ottomans and Devaditya.
Today, we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence, or AI. Don't be worried. It's not one of those talks about how evil AI can be or if it can enslave all of us. No. In fact, it's going to be a talk about hope. Because one of the areas where we see tremendous hope from the potential use of AI is in teaching. Surprised? Let's tell them why.
Recently, it was found that the world has a shortage of 65 to 68 million teachers. And just imagine that each of those would teach 100 students only. That would mean that approximately 680 million students are without a teacher. The pandemic has also put immense stress on our teachers. And this has led to the prediction that many teachers will leave the profession in the next 4 years. Hence, given these recent trends, I think we have a very worrying picture, that this global shortage of teachers is only increasing. Now, this shortage, we believe, is the biggest factor currently contributing to the global skills and education gap. Let us tell you how.
So today we have over 1 trillion megabytes of data being created every day. So with so much new data, and with our search engines already having connected most of the information on Earth, content needed to learn is not short by any stretch of the imagination, right? But that's where the importance of a teacher comes in. Let's just think about the 680 million students we just spoke about. They wouldn't be able to find what to learn in that sea of knowledge. And even if they did, every now and then they would come across some topics or some courses that they wouldn't be able to understand without a guiding hand. Let's just think about a first-time learner. How can we expect that a person who is the first person in their family to enter education learn without a teacher? And just to add to this, if that was actually possible, don't you think we could have already solved this gap simply by distributing free books and through YouTube and Khan Academy?
And think about yourself. If you were to be placed in a year 6 class at the right age and given books on algebra and trigonometry, would you be able to make sense of it? Or be able to be motivated to learn it in the first place without a guiding teacher? No, this guidance, this motivation, and this accountability is what is currently provided by teachers.
And even for us as Ottomans Institute, when we taught students across 10 countries during the pandemic, a time when over 1 billion students were pulled out of their classrooms, from UN camps to remote villages, we found this. While some of them appreciated the length of our program and some spoke about some of the topics that we had taught, every single one of the students spoke about the teacher being the most important aspect in their learning journeys. And I think all of us in this room are also privy to the importance of teachers during the pandemic. And just think about this. Would you have left your children with their textbooks and perhaps given them access to yet another edtech platform for 1.5 years and just perceived and just thought that their learning would be all right? Well, if teaching is so important, but at a time when we have such a massive shortage of teachers, which is only growing, And even from a quality point of view, all of us understand, right, that no two human beings teach in the same way. Then how can we teach the global population? Well, we believe and have done this using artificial intelligence. Now, let's talk about our next part of this story.
So why AI for teaching, you may wonder. Today, the young population in the world is growing disproportionately, with countries like India churning out 1 million adults every single month. Whilst this is the case, 800 million people do not have access to safe, clean drinking water, and 100 million primary school children cannot go to school. Building new schools takes a very, very long time and cannot properly be achieved when we don't have the basic amenities like safe and clean drinking water. Whilst, on the other hand, though, what we do see is a global penetration of smartphone technology.
And it's just not about smartphones today. Today we are in the era of 5G connectivity, and we have satellite internet connecting the remotest parts of the world. Some of these parts being connected would not be fathomable even a year ago. So today, that means we have millions of people who still don't have access to schools, let alone quality teachers. And some, even in the 21st century, don't have access to clean drinking water. But what they have access to is this, a smartphone. And yes, it's true. Just to shed some more light on this historic period of time that we are in, just in 2020, there were 6 billion smartphones in use. And this is going to increase to 7.3 billion just in the next 4 years.
Whilst that does not mean that necessarily everyone on Earth will have a smartphone, it clearly reflects the growth in this area compared to other forms of infrastructure like clean water or schools.
And it is using this technology, it is using this internet infrastructure today that we are giving to the world a human-like, conversational AI teacher for everyone in their pockets. It's available for anyone who wants to learn 24/7 at almost negligible cost. If needed, students no longer have to go to schools or even log in at a specific time. And perhaps most excitedly, it learns from your learning behavior to give you a personalized one-to-one teaching when you need it. And we call this OIAI.
OIAI is a conversational AI with 90 million data points that can converse on a variety of topics like a human. It can help you, give you a guiding hand, motivate you, engage with you, be your friend, among many other things. We make OIAI human-like using deepfake technology. Yes, a positive use of an otherwise misconceived technology, to make our learners feel like they're interacting with a human rather than a chatbot or a robot.
So our first creation or our first avatar of OIAI was Beatrice. Why Beatrice? Because she was named after our dear friend who is Beatrice, who gladly volunteered to deepfake her as our avatar. So meet Beatrice. And we first deployed Beatrice in a UNHCR camp in northern Iraq to teach some of the learners there on how to set goals. And we had to do this completely remotely, of course, because of the pandemic at that time. And boy, was that a journey. And I still remember the very first version of Beatrice. It could only work on Google Chrome and was a very basic web app.
And many of the learners in the camps, whose English is not native and far from being fluent, had old phones and did not have or did not know how to download Chrome.
So there I was for about an hour trying to explain to these students what to do. And to be frank, the last 15 minutes was just hopeless silence. You know that feeling that you get in your gut that what I wanted to do today or show today is just not going to happen. But just then, in the WhatsApp group we had created to communicate with all of these students in the camp, a girl we knew wrote. She spoke to me. And that was the time that gave the entire team tremendous motivation to keep developing Beatrice. And what we found over the next couple of weeks was, as we kept introducing Beatrice to them, a lot of the learners actually started liking to learn more from Beatrice than from me.
So after introducing the learners to Beatrice and gathering detailed feedback from them about their interactions, we found something interesting. The learners in the camp said they found Beatrice to be warm, with a social presence, motivating, trustworthy, useful. In other words, they found her human-like. Interestingly though is, they did not say words like information sharing, knowledge, content. Those are characteristics one would normally attribute to a teacher. Today, we are working on version 4 of Beatrice.
And that was not all. We then thought about accessibility. Because let's be frank, Beatrice was our web app, and not too many people know about Beatrice. And I'm sure none of you knew before we came here today. So we thought, is there a way we could take OI and plug her into other education platforms so that it could serve their learners? Remember, our core goal is not to create content. That's been done already. Our goal is to support teaching and learning outcomes. Some things that's done by teachers, and some things we believe are the most important aspects of actually reducing this global skills and education gap. So in our first attempt to do this, we created an AI coach that we stuck to an edtech platform in Africa that was serving underserved women. Now this AI coach did not have a human form like Beatrice, looked like a simple chatbot, only knew the name of the users and interacted with them through a series of few questions and buttons. But even then, this is what we found.
72% of learners said they would return to the platform because they liked interacting with the AI coach. 74% of learners said they now knew what to learn next because they got motivated and inspired and mostly guided by this AI coach. Remember, something traditionally done by a teacher. In fact, the majority said they even thought the coach was present with them and made them feel warm during the interactions, despite only using words and not having a human-like shape like Beatrice.
So, as you can see, what we did with OI was not give learners more information or just give them more choice of what to learn next. For all you iPhone lovers out there, I'm sure even Siri can do that. But what we actually did was create a human-like, personalized AI teacher that not only understands your learning needs, but keeps developing that with every interaction they have with you. And through this, we hope to give the world a universal teacher. Because after all, it's not information giving only that a teacher does, right?
And on that note, I would like you all to take 5 seconds and think about your favorite teacher. We've all had one.
This is very important for us. And that's because we believe to truly create that universal teacher that can teach anybody on earth, we first need to understand what makes our favorite teacher a favorite for us.
And we broke this down into 5 categories, which we call major. Major represents motivation, encouragement, joy, understanding, and hand-holding. Major represents, we believe, the 5 core qualities that our favorite teacher has. And it's those qualities that motivates us, guides us what to learn next, and apply the knowledge that we are learning. Now, we understood this by researching what is teaching, what does a teacher do, and perhaps most importantly, what do our learners need across 10 countries.
So, all of us have heard about how evil AI can be, right? And media has shown us about the ill uses of deepfake technology and other modern technologies. But hey, here we are using the same technologies to solve what is perhaps the biggest social development challenge of modern society. Today, content is abundant, but we need a teacher to come and understand our learning journeys, to challenge and test our knowledge, to show us what to learn next, to tell us which skills to develop, to actually become who we really want to become.
And today we are improving our OI AI with 1 billion more conversation points and even to make it more human-like with the ability to empathize with learners. We are also using the same model to generate human-like interactions for the hearing-impaired community using sign language. But it is not the technology that got us to where we are. It's our ability to understand the problem faced by millions at its core.
And it was that ability that allowed us to decipher what a teacher does first that has gotten us to where we are today. And AI, as a technology, was just the tool to build that solution. So next time you face a problem and you think that it's worth solving for you or for millions around you, I urge you to look at its core first and to start solving its most basic components. Because the technology, no matter how it's perceived, will always be just around the corner to help you build that solution. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Computers start off with code, numbers and letters, and now it's teaching you your times tables. That's utterly mind-boggling, but it is truly somewhere at the end of the destination tomorrow. So you'll be pleased to know we have a break now. Go outside, have a drink, go talk to the speakers. They want to speak to you. I'm sure you'd love to speak to them as well. And we will be back here in about 20 minutes. Thank you very much. So, tomorrow, but we need a break every now and then. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Some water, some coffee, tea, etc., biscuits. Lunch is afterwards, so I hope you're not too hungry just yet. The next speakers are people I know quite well. They've got a very interesting story to tell you. I'll give you 3 guesses what's dominated the news in the past 2 years. And the COVID-19 pandemic, for many of us, including me, was an invitation to lay back, take it easy, work from home. No lectures at 9 a.m., for me anyway. For some people, though, it was the setting of some amazing ideas and a really inspirational journey. And I hope you're ready to be introduced to what is, for me, one of the greatest outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic within my friendship group, at the very least. Please welcome the absolutely amazing Yusuf Alawad and Daniel Lee.
Thank you. Click. That's for you, young man. Ladies and gentlemen, before you may just see a box. It sits there humbly, squarely, brownly, cardboardly. But to us, this box represents more. It actually represents some of the great ideas that you guys may have had and could have become a reality, but didn't. Also, to us, it represents one idea that did. Let us explain.
Now, in the glistening sun of last summer, with my hair overgrown and my face substantially more youthful than it is today, this box, in its crisper, slightly newer form, started its journey with us on what became one of the most exhilarating, interesting, educational, but at times painful and miserable and cold and sometimes wet experience of both of our lives.
Now, this box, it's seen it all. It's met photographers, it's met suppliers, manufacturers, shipping agents. It's met other boxes.
It's also met the world's least politically correct embroiderer. It's also met park benches in the beautiful London sun and some very, very glamorous models. It even came with us on our first UK-wide marketing tour.
And on that tour, on our very first day of trading, this humble box became part of the architecture of our first ever HQ. So it's been there all the way, and that's why it is with us today.
This happens to be the alleyway of a hall of residence on our first ever trip.
Indeed. So, we set about setting up a business.
But what did the world look like many months ago?
Many months ago, the world did not look like such a fun place. COVID was rife. We were jumping in and out of lockdowns. And by the way, we'd like to thank this new variant for keeping our talk so relevant at the moment. The business world was incredibly uncertain, and universities were effectively shut. So not a fantastic time, as I'm sure you'll agree, to start a fashion business with a focus on the university market.
But as you might have guessed, with us being here today, we did anyway. Now, we as human beings are wedded, and actually it's the contention of our talk today, to this notion of the perfect time. The perfect time to do anything. The perfect time to start. And this manifests in all different ways. The perfect time to get married. I'll only get married when I'm a certain age. Or I'll only have a certain amount of kids with only a certain salary. Or the perfect time to ask that girl out you've always wanted to ask out at the perfect party. Or the perfect time to start an essay. Not today when you're a bit tired, but maybe a bit later on. What we discovered when we were butting heads and building this idea, with sharing ideas that often were terrible and sometimes brilliant, and a lot of ideas that were just in between, is that this idea of the perfect time is a complete fallacy. There is no such thing as the perfect moment. And what we discovered was the opposite. Actually, it's in those imperfect moments that some of the most resilient ideas can thrive.
So, in our incredibly imperfect circumstances, what was the idea? Well, we both had an interest in fashion, in the way that humans can portray a part of their identity through their clothing. I had studied in the United States, and something that had struck me whilst I was there was the relationship, the incredibly strong relationship between young people and American university fashion. But what struck me even more was, on my return to the UK, the relationship between young people here and their relationship with American university fashion. So, with the creative genius of Yusuf, who is seen here depicted as a 1940s painter, we started designing, we started thinking, we started sourcing sustainable materials. But to us, the mission was clear. We were going to make British university fashion cool. The apparel was born.
Now, this idea that was abstract and bound only in our heads and bounced off in cafes became a reality. It manifested in a range of products that we brought out to market. And soon we found ourselves becoming our own marketeers, our own accountants, our own publicists, our own lawyers, and even sourcing our own materials from overseas.
And I even had to practice climbing step ladders, which was thoroughly enjoyable.
This was when Daniel was taking pictures of our products early on.
So what else did we do? We ran socially distanced events where legislation permitted. In a world that was working from home, we switched our focus to online and to e-commerce. Our business developed and grew in ways that it never otherwise would have if it wasn't for these imperfect circumstances.
And this nimbleness and agility manifested in different ways, even actually in the ways that we transported the box itself, or at least one of its distant cousins. And things were going suspiciously well at this point. You know, despite the imperfect circumstances, we had built a brand that we believed in, that represented our values. We also fortified a very strong e-commerce platform, and we'd expanded across the United Kingdom. So things were going all right. And then this happened. Yeah.
Imagine fire engines, a lot of sirens,
Yeah.
general pandemonium.
Yeah, terrible. A few tears.
Yeah.
It literally all went up in flames. Literally.
A freak accident in the warehouse next to us that definitely wasn't to do with insurance or arson led to an enormous inferno that absolutely barbecued our entire business. Now, Yusuf and I, as two, at the time, future trainee lawyers, and now as trainee lawyers, you would have expected us to have taken out insurance against fire risk. But actually, we had forgotten to do that, and our business was barbecued. So what did we do next? Over a very somber cup of coffee, we asked ourselves the question, should we pack it in? Should we give up? Should we throw in the towel? Should we pack it in? And this was probably our lowest moment, but it certainly wasn't the first time that we'd asked ourselves this question, should we pack it in? And it definitely hasn't been the last.
No, we asked ourselves, should we pack it in, a few times throughout our journey. We asked ourselves, for example, should we pack it in when I accidentally crashed the entire website during a sale and decided to go off for lunch. We also asked ourselves, should we pack it in when Daniel decided to shift our stock using the only logistics company in the whole of America to go bankrupt during the pandemic.
But I think my favourite instance of where we asked ourselves that fateful question, should we pack it in, was with our limited edition colourway release. So what this was for part of our product range to release brand new, vibrant, bright colours. We're talking pinks, yellows, oranges, the lot. We were super excited about this. You know, we had arranged a marketing campaign. We'd bashed our heads together on this. We'd sorted a photo shoot. And as ever, we were going to run this photo shoot with models, etc., and on film, because film, you know, there's a vintage look, and it's in keeping with our brand. But one of the things about a film shoot is that it takes a couple of weeks for photos to be processed and come back to you. And normally, this is a fantastic thing, because the anticipation grows. We can't wait to see how they come out. We're really excited, get these bright colours out. And they came back, and all the film had been in black and white for these brand new colours.
Now, this imperfect notion that we spoke about in the beginning, we learned the hard way, is not something that just extends to the beginning or the start of any enterprise or any venture that you intend on carrying out. This imperfect notion extends throughout your business journey or throughout any project that you intend on doing. Now, we believe that the myths around business need to be demystified.
Indeed. So, and one of the most important things we learned about the imperfect on our journey was that actually therein lies the greatest value and the greatest resilience to be drawn. It's not necessarily in the good times where everything's going well. It's when you're asking yourself, should we pack it in? Because every single time so far that we've asked ourselves that question, it's been followed by, no, let's not pack it in. And therein lies great resilience, but not only as a business, but also as people to carry on in the face of adversity.
Now, a very, very intelligent guy called Abraham Wald, who came up with this theory behind us, thought about the notion of something called survivorship bias. Now, we're all guilty of it, and it's the idea of looking only at the winners, at the champions, at those who made it. And this is something we're all guilty of. Now, during World War II, the US Air Force needed to fortify and armor the plane a bit more. They couldn't armor the whole plane, otherwise it might be too heavy to fly. So what they did do is analyze all the planes that returned from battle and analyzed all the parts that were shot at the most. Now, intuitively, when you look at that data set, you would think you'd armor the bits that were shot at the most. Now, Abraham Wald, who came up with the theory, thought, nah, that's an awful idea, because these were the planes that survived to be part of the data set at the beginning. What you actually need to look at are the bits that aren't shot at, because they're the planes that never made it back. Now, this idea of survivorship theory essentially says you're looking at the wrong bits most of the time. You're looking at the wrong bits. We believe that this idea manifests itself in business as well.
So we're looking at the wrong bits. I think today, in the age of social media, you're bombarded by the perfect. You can be an entrepreneur or start something and it'll be easy. You won't have to ask yourself the question, should we pack it in? But I think what we hope to impart today is that it's more important to look at the imperfect and the struggle, and therein lies great resilience.
Now, I'm not going to stand here, and neither of us are going to stand here and say this imperfect journey isn't without some really, really perfect moments. We made more revenue in our first year of trading than Nike did in their first year of trading. We've expanded across the whole country with an intention of expanding our range even further. We also actually took out some insurance against fires this time.
And we met heroes such as Peter Andre
on one of our
along the way. So it can't all be bad.
Which was an incredible highlight for us.
So, where does that leave us? I think we have to come back to our humble brown cardboard friend, the box. Yes, it still represents some of those ideas that you guys may have had that could have become a reality and didn't. And hopefully today we've given you a little insight into our little idea that did become a reality. But also we think it can become a representative of the ideas that you guys will have tomorrow that may be able to become a reality. But what we would say is that won't be without struggle. That won't be without strife. You may even use the words, should we pack it in? But what we would suggest is that you embrace the imperfect. Thank you. You want to take that?
What handsome young man. I was very young when my mum gave me a fantastic life lesson. My dear mother, who I love sincerely. She gave me a bit of advice and said, listen, count your pennies. It's important. And she made this observation because I used to go to McDonald's and take those pennies that you'd get after buying a $1.99 Happy Meal. Inflation's ruined all that, obviously, now, but it used to be $1.99. And I used to hold it against the plastic thing that you could donate into, and it would spin and spin and spin and go down. And my mum was like, actually, 1 second. Because without that 1 penny, you can never be a millionaire. You'll be at 999,999.99p. Big numbers for me at the time, but I think I understood what she was trying to say. I then decided later on in life that I'd do an economics GCSE, and I learned about the function of money. It's a really interesting concept. Without money, you'd have to barter. I would have to have something that you want, and you'd have to have something that I want, and we could trade. The thing about money is that it's universally accepted. You can have anything, and I can get it off you for money. And it is fair to say, it defines a lot of our day-to-day life. And recently, something really interesting happened. The crypto world was born. And that's what today's talk is about, because if anything can be said almost certainly about tomorrow, is that crypto is going to play a massive role. And the man we have here today to give us this talk is a really, really interesting and exciting man. He's going to give us a fantastic lesson on Bitcoin, the blockchain, and everything involved. Please welcome Damian Culhane to the stage.
For centuries, humans have been counting and storing and keeping record of numbers. And as we progressed in our ability to count, we grew the amount of information that we needed to store and keep record of. So we needed to keep this information in an orderly fashion known as ledgers. So the early ledgers were examples of how we kept the information in an orderly fashion. As technology advanced, the information and volume of information grew, which created additional problems of how do we access this volume of data rapidly and in a reliable way. And at this point, ledgers were computerized. And so we had access to information at very, very quick speeds, and the volume of information was helping us to be able to make decisions, and it became more crucial to decision making. But there was a problem, highlighted by the global financial crisis of 2008. And at that time, the integrity of the data became corrupted, and the interpretation by humans of that data became unreliable and also untrustworthy. The events of 2008 basically highlighted that data integrity was an issue where data was either ignored or misinterpreted, and in some cases risky and reckless decisions were made where the data was completely disregarded. In response to this, an anonymous person or persons known under the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto developed and created an idea about digital currency. And this was given as a reward for helping to build an enormous giant network of computers that could be trusted to talk to one another, known as a blockchain. A blockchain is basically a series of computers that all talk to one another through cryptography. They're all connected through a cryptographic code. Every single blockchain starts with a genesis block, which is holding the exact protocol for what the code is to unlock each block. And so as each block is added, a reward is given for increasing the capacity of that network. So now we grow the network, and all those computers can talk to one another, and all those computers can agree on what it is that they're actually talking about, and they all have that protocol that they've agreed to. So they have this tick box that certifies that they're all agreeing not only on the information, but they're all agreeing on how they're going to cryptographically protect that information. So effectively, blockchain gamified a crowdsourced, trusted network of computers. So this is a distributed ledger, and this is what we know now as a modern ledger. The blockchain is now becoming a distributed ledger. So with this distributed ledger, each time a new block is added, it's known as mining. And when you mine, you add a new block to the blockchain. The reward for adding a new block to the Bitcoin blockchain is actually 6.25 Bitcoin, which is worth around about £200,000 right now. So every time a new block is added, the developer that's added that block is rewarded with £200,000 approximately of revenue. Now, blockchain has come a long way in addressing the core issue of data integrity. And the opportunities now are vast. The applications are infinite. But there is a problem. Every time a new block is added, it uses up natural resources. It uses up energy. So this has been addressed by a number of pieces of research where the blockchain is using renewable energy. So this ranges from 39% up to 73% in terms of the use of renewable energy within blockchain. So it's come a long way in understanding the issues of how to actually use energy effectively. Blockchain actually lends itself really well to using solar, hydro, and water power and wind power. So it's a really good way of being able to use the different natural resources. And there are many heavy industries that are still reliant upon fossil fuels that could learn from the new kid on the block. So could this be the coming of age for blockchain? Right now, blockchain is used for storing medical records safely and securely. It's all encrypted. It can't be touched by anything other than the system. So it's safe and secure for storing medical records. Transactions can be agreed across the network in fractions of a second. Even contracts and agreements are really well suited to being used on the blockchain. So blockchain has many, many advantages and many, many ways that it can support our modern day life. Videos can be downloaded and live streamed across a decentralized network. So from that point of view, we know that it's a very, very fast capacity and very, very good at being able to interact with people's daily lives. One of the things that has boomed in the past 12 months is something called non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. New NFTs are minted, and they prove originality. So artists and musicians and gamers have jumped on this trend, and they're creating items of value that they sell directly to people who want to buy those NFTs. This decentralized approach means that the creator gets more of the royalty than previously because it's paid directly to them, minus a few fees for using the blockchain, of course. But the point is that it's a decentralized approach that gives more control to the creator of the material. In terms of the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is still the original cryptocurrency, and it is still the largest of all the cryptocurrencies. It's currently trading at around $48,000, and I've checked that just a moment ago. And it does vary, so it does move up and down. It's quite a volatile market, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But Bitcoin has 21 million coins. It's restricted, so it will never go beyond 21 million coins. So the value can go up based on the scarcity or based on the demand and based on the popularity. And Bitcoin is given as a reward for creating this giant network. So it's a really valuable way of rewarding people to grow this decentralized network. In terms of the total market, the size of the market is dynamic because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are traded globally 24/7. Bitcoin still represents the largest majority of the blockchain and cryptocurrency market, and the total market changes literally by the moment, by the minute, because it's 24/7. So what can we learn from Bitcoin around the predominance of how it's been adopted in cryptocurrency? There are over 10,000 alternative coins and tokens now available. So this is a technology which is here to stay and is growing and will be around for some time to come. Right now, you can use Bitcoin to earn and pay for items, and to pay for items such as a car, a house. You can buy gold and silver with it, for example. More and more things are becoming available to be able to be bought with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrencies. You can spend other cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin is still the major one that everyone accepts and is widely accepted. And this payment method is increasing. In fact, in El Salvador, they recently adopted Bitcoin as legal tender alongside the US dollar. So it's becoming more and more acceptable for countries to actually start to adopt this. So we can look at this because there are challenges. The decentralized nature of blockchain and the adoption of cryptocurrency can be seen as disruptive. So it faces challenges. For example, governments could see decentralized autonomous organizations as a threat. They use regulation to say that they're going to protect consumers, but could that just be a cover? Banks, in particular, are unlikely to want to give up their monopoly on printing money. And most of them are already talking about developing their own digital currency, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The retail banks have made it very difficult for you and I to be able to invest in cryptocurrency, and on-ramping of money into crypto exchanges has become quite challenging. And also, large organizations that have the power to censor your content or control your data are unlikely to want to relinquish their power over that and the huge profits they make from harvesting your data. So let's unpack one of these areas in particular. I mentioned about the central banks. The central banks are developing a digital currency known as central bank digital currency, CBDC. And pretty much it might look like a cryptocurrency, but it is absolutely the opposite. Because the bank will continue to want you to invest your money and deposit your money into their vaults. They take that money and they use it to speculatively make profit that they don't share with you. And that's unlikely to change. They also want to restrict your money and restrict access to it if they don't like what you're spending your money on. For example, cryptocurrency. And so they could restrict your access to money, and this is unlikely to change with a central bank digital currency because they can switch it on and off whenever they desire. So their control will be even greater over your money. Banks are also likely to continue with centralized decision making. You may have experienced the computer says no moments when trying to make transactions, and this is unlikely to change anytime soon. Central banks have a habit of printing money when the economy is not doing very well. This has been seen to not be a very good strategy long term because it brings the country into debt. But with central bank digital currency, this will be even easier for them to do as they can add zeros onto a spreadsheet, quite literally. They create money from nothing with no backing, and that will be easier for them to control when they have a central bank digital currency. And one final point on CBDC. The digital currency is programmable money, which means that the bank can put an expiry date on your money. And your money will expire literally before your eyes, and you could actually be restricted from accessing your money based on such things as your social credit score. And this is already happening in China. So other countries are watching and seeing what's happening for the future. Now, if you look at cryptocurrency and fail to see the importance of blockchain technology and the significance of decentralized autonomous organizations, this is short-sighted and mistaken. It's a little bit like this coin. In the UK, this has a face value of £2. So to the untrained eye, it just looks like an ordinary £2 coin. But to the discerning investor and to someone who is trained, they will see that this is 1 ounce of pure fine silver, which is actually selling for around £28 in the UK. I firmly believe that when we can see beyond the face value of cryptocurrency and we can start to be more discerning towards blockchain and the possibilities that it offers to empower decentralized autonomous organizations to accelerate, a vast ocean of opportunity will open up for humanity. There are significant moments in history, pivotal moments, when we get to redefine and recalibrate our future. The Berlin Wall came to symbolize freedom from oppression, and it was a symbol that we identify with the crumbling of an oppressive society. Maybe we'll look back in future at blockchain and see that as a moment where our liberty and digital freedom has been given. Could this be the start of the decentralized revolution? Who knows where we will end up with the technology and where it will lead us to? Maybe your car of the future will be earning you cryptocurrency while it charges overnight. Maybe you'll have a sovereignty over your data so that you get to decide what happens with your data and how you want to have other people access it. There's already technology available where the blockchains are talking to one another, offering a massive, powerful network. And this is giving us a fantastic opportunity as humanity to move forward with decentralized autonomous organizations having a platform to build and build and build. Cryptocurrency is still in its infancy, establishing itself as an asset class. But the future of blockchain and the popularity of decentralized autonomous organizations is certainly going to be around for a long time to come. Our journey with the technology will continue for a long period of time. Let's hope we're all here to enjoy the ride to destination tomorrow. Thank you.
A fascinating topic. You know, the thing about crypto, it seems to answer so many questions, and yet for some reason we haven't embraced it. I think Damian touched on some of those reasons just now. Another thing that's really interesting is something that we've been doing throughout today, actually, the speakers and myself, is words. We spend a lot of time studying them. They manifest in different ways. They're almost the subtitles to the buzzing of your brain. They manifest in day-to-day life, and they tell the other person exactly what's going on up here. And their influence, of course, and power is something that doesn't need to be elaborated. What the next speaker is going to do is talk to us about how great leaders choose their words to influence for the better, hopefully. Please welcome the absolutely amazing Perrine Farque.
It's April 2019, and I'm sitting in my London office in a small booth at work. It's 5 p.m. and it's my last meeting of the day. I feel really excited because I'm going to talk about my promotion with my manager. I have received great feedback on my work, and the company is doing really well. And as my manager joins the meeting, she looks very quiet and she doesn't make eye contact with me. And she says something to me. She says something to me that stayed with me ever since. She said to me that I was not ready yet for the promotion and that I should demonstrate that I was capable of managing a team first. I felt devastated. According to a study by Massachusetts Institute of Technology, women do not get promoted because managers underestimate their potential. And according to a Lean-In study, for every 100 men who get a promotion, only 72 women experience the same thing. I often wondered if I had told my manager that I was already managing a team at home of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, maybe I would have gotten the promotion. But in any case, this made me wonder, how do leaders choose their words? And what makes leaders say what they say? A few weeks after that event, I came across an article that really caught my attention. The article said that in the Fortune 500 companies, there are more CEOs named John than women CEOs. And only 3% of the US population is named John, and 50% of the US population is female. So that's the equivalent of excluding half of the population from top leadership positions. So if you're ever with the CEO of a big company and if you can't remember their name, try John, and you might be on the right track. But as a diversity and inclusion consultant, I have consulted with many organizations in helping them create a more inclusive workplace. I've consulted with large organizations and I've consulted with small organizations. And there is one thing I've noticed that great leaders do. Great leaders use the same words to describe men and women. In contrast, there are many leaders who talk about a man's potential for a promotion, and they talk about a woman's need to demonstrate their past accomplishment first. Think about it this way. Imagine it's your birthday, and you invite your best friends and your family to celebrate your birthday. Imagine that you order your favorite birthday cake. Imagine that someone walks into the room, they cut your cake in half, and they throw away half of your cake in the bin. How would you feel about not being able to enjoy the whole cake? It's like we throw away half of the talent in the bin when we exclude all the women from leadership positions. I know I love food, so I would always go for the whole cake option. But today, more than ever before, we must bridge the gender gap. Did you know that the time it will take to close the gender gap in the world has increased from 99 years before the pandemic to 135 years since the pandemic? So that's the equivalent of waiting 99 years to bridge the gender gap, and also waiting for the life of a baby being born today and waiting until she or he reaches their mid-30s. So today, I will share with you 3 ways that great leaders choose their words to make the world a more inclusive place. Number 1, great leaders avoid gender-biased words. Did you know that 44% of women will not apply to a job if the job description includes the word aggressive? That's nearly 50% of all the women who will not even send their CV to a job if it has the word aggressive in the job description. A few years ago, I was part of a team that was distributed across the US and Europe. And our team meetings often turned into spirited debates. That's code word for arguments. Everybody had very strong opinions and was very vocal. One day, my manager came to me, and she said something to me that, to this day, stayed with me. She said that I was being too aggressive and too emotional during those team meetings, and I should soften down my tone. When I asked her about my male colleagues, she said they were just being assertive and passionate. But when we use words like emotional or aggressive to describe women, we make them feel less qualified. Nobody wants to be called aggressive or a drama queen at work. In contrast, when we use masculine words like right-hand man or manpower in a job description, we make women feel like they don't belong. As James Brown famously said, this is a man's word, but it would be nothing without a woman or a girl. Number 2, great leaders fight microaggressions. Who has ever been in a meeting and you heard someone asking the only woman in the room, can you take notes? Or can you book the restaurant? Yeah. A few years ago, I was part of a senior leadership team, and Christmas was approaching. and our manager wanted to host a Christmas gathering for the leadership team. I was the only woman in the team, and he asked me if I could book the restaurant for the Christmas gathering. I ended up spending hours researching restaurants, making calls, sending emails, coordinating the time with my colleagues, whilst my male colleagues were just getting on with their work. Think about microaggressions like mosquito bites. When you only get bitten by a mosquito every once in a while, it's annoying, but it's not that big of a deal. But when you get bitten by a mosquito over and over and over again, it can become overwhelming. And some people get bitten by mosquitoes all the time. So next time you need help with restaurant booking, remember that nobody likes mosquito bites, and maybe you can ask a man to help. 3, great leaders do not give vague feedback to women. Researchers at Stanford University found that the main reason for the lack of women in leadership is due to the vague feedback that women receive over their careers. By analyzing performance reviews from 3 large technology companies, they found that women were less likely than men to receive feedback tied to business outcome. And in contrast, men received a clearer picture of what they were doing right to impact the business and what to do to get promoted. The study also found that women were praised for team contributions versus individual accomplishments. Suggestions for improvement for women were focused on their emotion, personality, and tone, and those for men were focused on specific actionable feedback. Women were also described as being helpful, collaborative, and supportive twice as often as men, and, wait for it, they received 76% of the mention of being too aggressive. In contrast, words used to describe men included drive, transform, tackle, and innovate. As Bill Gates famously said, we all need feedback. That's how we improve. So, here you have it, 3 ways that great leaders choose their words to create a more inclusive society. Number 1, they avoid gender-biased words like aggressive, emotional, or manpower. Number 2, they fight microaggressions like mosquito bites. And number 3, they avoid giving vague feedback to women, and instead, they focus on practical and actionable feedback. As human beings, we are all biased. We all say things without thinking about it. But we all have the power to choose our words, and we can all become heroes by using a more inclusive language. So let's do this. Let's choose our words better to become the inclusive leaders we were born to be. Thank you.
I'm very sorry. Be okay, darling. It's okay. What a great talk, and yes, the power of words, very, very important. 3 important lessons for all of us to learn. And I'll tell you a word that I particularly love. I'll tell you, it's lunch. Lunch is a great word, and it's lunchtime now. Go and get some food, guys, okay, and we'll see you very soon. So, lunch is over. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Lots of food out there. So, if you didn't get enough food, if you're still hungry at the end, there will be plenty waiting for you. If there's one thing that's really, really peculiar about what's happened in recent times, is that it was a call to humanity banding together that actually exposed some of the deep fractures within society. It was a very interesting moment and something quite peculiar to observe. And that's what this next talk gives us an insight into. The prejudices, the stigmas, as we've already discussed, but in a very personal example. And I think it's a talk that will bring reflection and much needed consolidation on a topic that's not always talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage an ARU medical student, Hannah Maria Francis.
One, a loving father from Minneapolis, publicly murdered. 2, an epidemic, perhaps perpetuated by a lack of self-control, which is worsening despite a seemingly obvious solution. And 3, a pandemic that has irreversibly changed the landscape of our lives and continues to do so as I speak. But how are these things linked? And how can we even start to solve these problems when we're not really sure of their causes? Let's go back to December 2019. Coronavirus washed over the world and forced us to look at what really mattered: surviving. We locked down and worked from home as if the world was ending. It was for so many. But this effect was not evenly spread. When I tested positive for COVID-19 in December 2020, I thought that it was a death sentence. I thought that the indigenous Caribbean part of my heritage and my BMI of over 45 would put me in the ground, or at the very least in an intensive care bed. And everywhere I looked convinced me further. The news, online articles, social media, health campaigning, you name it. Anxious and overwhelmed, I said to myself, Han, let's break this down. I looked at the study that had everybody so panicked by the World Obesity Federation. But when I found the part that had everyone so worried, I realized we'd been a little misled. Yes, increased risks of COVID are associated with increased BMI or obesity, but not as much as being older or perhaps being of the male sex. Additionally, deprivation plays a huge role in COVID-19 outcomes, with the most deprived facing an increased risk of death comparable to that of people with chronic liver failure and diabetes. We also know that race and deprivation are intertwined, with the systemic remnants of colonialism impacting all areas of our lives. This can include housing segregation, likelihood to be in high exposure jobs, and the inability to social distance, self-isolate, or work from home due to overcrowding. But understandably, race, sex, and age are not modifiable risk factors. So surely we could just lose weight, reduce our risks of dying of COVID, and all the other diseases that are associated with obesity, like coronary heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and cancer. Well, as someone who's lost weight by dieting and regained even more, I knew that the smart choices that I made in the past, and still some of which I make to this day, were not going to take my weight to a healthy range. I did what doctors, fitness experts, and society tells us to do. I ate less and moved more. But I didn't see the results that I was supposed to. Fast forward a few years, and while in medical school, I learned that long-term weight loss is pretty much impossible. Yes, you heard me right, and let me explain. Truthfully, we don't really know the true factors that determine our weight. But what we do know is that our hormones, genetics, and the environment to an extent all have a part to play. Our bodies like to stay at what's known as a set point weight, a comfort range that's individual and varies by about 5 to 10 kilograms either way. What determines this set point is largely genetic, and it's really hard to manipulate. Evidence for the genetic basis of weight comes from the studies of twins and adoptees. Identical twins, so twins with the exact same DNA, are separated and put on different diet plans and exercise regimes. And it's found that their BMIs remain almost exactly the same. Additionally, people who are adopted from young show more similar BMIs to their biological parents compared with their adoptive ones, showing us that weight has a much more genetic component than we thought. Furthermore, meta-analyses, so studies of studies, show that diets don't actually produce long-term weight loss. In fact, up to 95% of dieters will regain the weight they lose short-term, showing us that something we thought was controllable with sheer willpower is maybe controllable temporarily, at best. And when we do try to control that number on the scale, our health can actually worsen. Physically, we see a decreased basal metabolic rate and decreased muscle mass, and an increased propensity to store fat. Psychologically, we obsess over food, and we are more likely to binge and feel guilt and shame when we don't see the results that we want. This can lead us to an increased risk of depression, anxiety, and eating disorders, let alone the chronic stress one might face living in a world where fat stigma is still a real issue. When I realized that the figures around COVID-19 and obesity were being used to cause fear and panic around fatness, I wanted to know why. If obesity hasn't been yet directly proven to cause more severe outcomes from COVID-19, then why make us so worried about it, especially if it's something that's so out of our control? Well, there are two main reasons for this. The first one is money. Fear sells. $176 billion a year to be exact, and by 2022, the diet industry could be worth over $245 billion. Considering that these products that we call diets don't actually work, and what's more, they can actually worsen our health, that's a lot of money we're spending on the thin ideal. Also, the diet industry has much more to gain from causing yo-yo dieting or weight cycling, which is actually one of the largest determinants of obesity, than there is to just let us be comfortable in our bodies and encourage behaviors that might actually improve our health, like eating a varied and balanced diet, engaging in enjoyable exercise, and cultivating our mental health and self-care practice. But when did we start using weight as a tool to judge people in the first place? Now that brings me on to my second reason: the legacy of colonialism. At the advent of the transatlantic slave trade, negative stereotypes around Black people were being formed and embedded into Western society. Black people were viewed as utterly carefree animals who were sexually and orally indulgent. Physically, it was noted that Africans were more plump and voluptuous, resulting in this association between blackness, largeness, and unattractiveness, and the opposite view that whiteness was associated with goodness, purity, beauty, and thinness. A few centuries later, these perceived stereotypes still persisted as the field of race science was used by influential white men to claim superiority over their colonized subjects. Black women were viewed as so biologically inferior that they would eventually die off due to their unwieldy size and animal appetites. Newsflash, we're still here. Considering this was only a few hundred years ago, it's no surprise that these racist stereotypes have influenced the medicine that we use to treat people today. One example is the BMI, in which the original cutoffs for each weight categories were calculated by data from only Caucasian people. But we're in 2021, medicine has come such a long way and we're living longer than ever, but we're still seeing these healthcare disparities between ethnic groups. I've shown you the figures from COVID-19, but we can see medical racism in much more simple examples. Take the pulse oximeter, a device used to measure the amount of oxygen in one's blood. A 2020 study has found that it can actually underestimate hypoxemia, so a lack of oxygen in the blood, for people with darker skin. Now, this leaves us with one of our staple baseline observations in medicine, less accurate for BAME people compared with that of their white counterparts, which could lead to the underdetection of a condition that will inevitably kill someone. Furthermore, other medical measurements such as kidney function testing, lung function testing, fracture risk assessment, and even organ donor viability screening all use race as a factor in calculating the result. Now, apart from this being kind of unscientific, as race is a social construct and not a biological marker that can be measured, these results can also become a barrier to treatment for minority ethnic patients. A better approach to offer holistic care would be to take into account the lived experience one has because of their race, not just the color of their skin. So, we're back to my original question. How are these things linked? COVID-19 gives us a clear example of the fact that the systems that we live in were not built for all, but for the benefit of those in power. This now negatively affects other minority groups in society, such as LGBTQ+ people, disabled people, marginalized genders, neurodivergent people, and of course, fat people. But the difference with fatphobia is that it is still socially acceptable to outwardly bully people for a trait that's mostly genetic. We instill this into our children to the point that they would rather have a disability than be fat, and we encourage the ridicule of fat people through pervasive stereotypes in the media. A way we can overcome this culture of judgment and discrimination is through a combination of systemic change, education, and kindness. The systemic change we need to see is greater than changing our medical devices after the fact, or seeing racism as a constellation of individual events. Racism has its effects from the time of birth and is so deeply ingrained in society that it's really hard to tell where it starts and ends. This means that we require a serious reevaluation of our policies, practices, and cultures if we're truly to stamp out racism and have any chance at true change. A key way in which we can achieve this is education, as knowledge is power. We've already started empowering people with anti-racism workshops, seminars, and tutorials. But there's a lot of work to be done still for fat bias. We need our children from young to be taught healthful behaviors in the aim of self-care, not fat avoidance. And we need our healthcare providers to adopt a health at every size approach, with weight bias being included in their equality and diversity training. We've got work to do. Doing the work can be from home, at your local coffee shop, or even introspectively. But what matters here is that we uproot our subconscious beliefs, and we do this in the name of truth, science, and fairness. Lastly, I'd like to encourage you all to have compassion for each other, but also for yourselves. My own journey of self-love stems from a place of very low self-esteem and just wishing my body away most of my life. I dieted and shrunk myself and just wished I could wave a magic wand and change my mix of features. All along, I thought that this girl was the problem. That I was stupid, lazy, unattractive, and only lucky to be in any positive position I was in. Not deserving. To finish, I'd like to tell all of you what I would tell her now. You are bold, you are brilliant, and you are smart. Your body is an amazing vessel for you to sail through this world in, so treat it with love. Use kindness and wisdom, not the opinions of others, to decide how to keep it. Don't starve it, hate it, and harm it, for it's just trying its best to protect you. Lastly, but not least, feed it well, lots of dumplings. Move it joyfully, even your squeaky Dr. Martens boots, and let it rest and relax, as there will be storms on your journey. But like everything, it will pass. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Hannah. What a lovely photo. Look at that. Massive smile on your face, as always, as always. What I enjoy about Hannah's talk and her theme is it's, you know, the concept of loving yourself. I think that's really important. And my father always used to say to me, keep yourself as number one. You're the first priority, and then others. Not in an egoistic way, but of course, he sort of meant to say, no one will give you the credit unless you give it to yourself first. And that's fair enough, I think. And I like that about Hannah's talk. It really exemplifies that theme. The next talk, however, is quite a juxtaposition in many ways, because there are a few in society, and we touched on this earlier, who unfortunately, due to circumstances and experiences, reach a stage where they can't trust everything that their brain is interpreting, the things they're seeing, the things they're hearing. And rather than loving themselves, they might actually end up asking themselves quite a disquieting question, which is, am I crazy? Have I lost it? And so I'd like to introduce now onto the stage, after a short break, the amazing Saeed and Rahul. Thank you. Okay. My apologies. Cameraman needed a little... All good? Fantastic. Okay. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, for the second time, Saeed and Rohan.
Hi. How many of you have felt your phone buzz, but when you look, there wasn't a notification? A show of hands, please.
Quite a few. Or perhaps hearing your name being called, but when you look, no one's there. How about that one? Interesting. What do you think, Rohan? You think they're crazy?
Well, for those of you that put up your hands, we've got some bad news. Unfortunately, you're actually fine, don't worry about it. Illusions like these are a part of our daily lives. We've encountered them plenty of times too. But the real question is, when could these experiences indicate something unusual? When could they make you appear crazy? Hi, I'm Rohan.
And I'm Sayed. We're medical students from the Midlands, and today we are going on a journey. A journey where we tear down the stigma surrounding psychosis. What do you imagine when you think of someone crazy? Perhaps you imagine someone mad, someone wild, someone foolish. Just a couple of synonyms taken from the Oxford English Dictionary. But do you know what is crazy about the word crazy? Just how subjective it is. We often use the word crazy to label individuals who think or behave differently to what we consider is normal. A set of arbitrary rules, so to say, based on what our minds think is right. I mean, for all I know, this guy could be crazy.
Cheers for that insightful piece, Syed. Moving on, though, we would like for you all to meet B, our lovely patient who has recently emigrated from South Asia. Like many of you who put your hands up today, B also heard voices. But in her case, they're strange, they're unusual. They keep commenting on her activities, and it doesn't seem to stop.
As if that wasn't distressing enough, though, B received an unknown phone call and is now convinced that the Secret Service is following her. Now, I don't know about all of you, but doesn't this seem a bit strange? It could very well be possible that B has a psychiatric issue. We've all heard of depression, we've all heard of anxiety, but what about psychosis? Before coming into medicine, we certainly hadn't heard of psychosis, and that may be the case for a lot of you here today. Honestly, all we knew was what the media told us. Sensationalistic journalism pointing the finger and calling patients with psychosis killers. With cultural stigma and a lack of awareness, it is easy to believe that those suffering with psychosis are crazy, or perhaps even inherently violent. Contrary to the media's perception, though, those suffering with psychosis have a higher mortality rate. They are up to 3 times more likely to die.
But what actually is psychosis? Well, psychosis, it's a long-term, debilitating condition in which individuals experience a reality that's different to everyone else's. We most commonly see this in paranoid schizophrenia, a term you may have heard. And patients present with a host of symptoms. They may have hallucinations, where they see, feel, or hear things that are not there. They may have delusions, where they hold fixed, abnormal beliefs that don't fit with their background. Now B, our lovely patient, had aspects of both hallucinations and delusions, but her family didn't know what to do with them. Over the last 2 months, she's been getting slowly and progressively worse. She doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep. She gets paranoid, she gets worked up. It's gotten so bad at times that her own family, her own flesh and blood, have lashed out at her in anger. To top it all off, her local community, the community that she calls home now, they've started shunning her. They see her as strange, they see her as weird. They even sometimes call her crazy as she walks by. B's family, they've tried everything, bless them. From herbal remedies to prayers, nothing has worked. Reluctantly, they take B to see their GP, their family practitioner. When asked about mental health, they reveal that they are terrified, they are petrified at the thought of being given a psychiatric label. In their eyes, once a mental health label is given, it could never, ever be removed. They were mortified at the thought of being made permanent outcasts by their community. What would people think if their family was the one to have a crazy relative?
The concerns of B's family, as Rohan highlighted, are very common in the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community. They stem from 2 fundamental factors. Firstly, a lack of awareness. Many BAME individuals have a lot of uncertainty surrounding mental health and its impact. And secondly, cultural beliefs that skew the perception of mental health. Many wrongly assume that those suffering with mental health issues are weak, are crazy. The attitude towards psychosis within the BAME community renders it near impossible to talk about. This lack of dialogue, it creates a taboo, isolating those affected and fostering stigma. As members of the South Asian community ourselves, we have seen this stigma firsthand. It destroys lives, it destroys families. This must stop. There are various social factors that negatively influence the outcomes of BAME patients, including the need to fit into a new culture and also being wary of mental health services. All these elements come together to form a complex case that is often worsened by the fact that BAME patients tend to present at a time of crisis. This typically leads to poorer outcomes and is exactly why we need to recognize the features of psychosis early on. Early recognition could be the difference between being treated at home or being sectioned at the hospital.
So looking back on B's journey, what could have been done differently? How could she have felt better? Her local community often used the term bagal, their term for crazy. But with so many people saying this, B often wondered, am I crazy? Whilst no one else could appreciate her symptoms, for them, they can't truly understand it. These hallucinations were real to B. They happened. Why was she being called crazy for something that she wasn't making up? Hallucinations are just as real to the individual with psychosis as anything else that happens in our perceived world. In fact, you all listening to this speech today, it's just as real to you as a hallucinatory voice is to a patient with psychosis. So when we label these events as being crazy, or perhaps the person experiencing these events as being crazy, that terminology, it's unjust, it's oppressive, it's outdated. These are inherent biases that we all have, but we don't consider often. Tackling them can truly make the difference, and we can all move forward together in that vein. If we all work together, we can start to eliminate some of these small stigmas that are within our subculture.
B's story is inspired by the experiences of many BAME patients suffering with psychosis. We have identified a clear problem, but what can we do differently? It may be cliche to say, but education is super important. Knowledge is empowering. Discussions must be had and should involve everyone, from the Year 8 kid to the office manager working 8-hour days. Every community, BAME or not, should get stuck in. Family, friends, neighbors, every single one of you in this room has a vital role to play in tackling today's mental health crisis. Though psychosis may be hard for us to comprehend, open dialogue and safe spaces can go a long way. Just a simple smile and reassuring conversation can work wonders. So today, let's all take our first step together. Instead of asking, "Are you crazy?" let's ask, "Are you okay?"
You, our audience, are today's advocates for mental health. We hope we've inspired each and every one of you to think about psychosis and how we all together can make a change. Tomorrow's destination, a world much more supportive of mental health. It's far closer than we think. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for that fantastic talk. And yes, as I said, it helps us to consider whether the thing we consider reality is actually playing out correctly in our brains, and when it doesn't, what's the impact? That's the really important part of that talk. And it's fitting that it came from two medical students, future doctors who can actually make that change and maybe inspire it in us as well.
Have you ever played an online game? It's not a trick question. Angry Bird, Candy Crush, Pokemon Go, Minecraft, or even online Scrabble or online chess. Let me tell you about Jordan. The 12-year-old was bullied at school, and he felt like an outcast. He was ridiculed by his siblings at home on a daily basis. And he felt powerless and unsupported. All he wanted was to be included and accepted. One day, his entire life changed. Somebody he knew added him to a gaming group. It felt like freedom. Within a few days, strangers from across the world became friends, and he became part of a clan. As a member of the clan, he had to fulfill certain criteria. So he immersed himself into this fantasy world, somehow losing himself in the process. The fantasy and reality worlds merged into one. Soon Jordan started to lose track of time. He forgot to shower. He didn't eat for a whole day, whilst the empty cans of energy drinks kept piling on his desk. As school was online, Jordan didn't see a real person for days on end. He became more obsessive in supporting his gaming group and unlocking the next level. Soon, he won his first gaming marathon. Sadly, only the other gamers knew the significance of that. Gaming provides us with an amazing world, a fantasy world where everyone can be whatever they want, the way they want, when they want. It's a world full of endless possibilities, creativity, and connectedness. However, this connectedness can sometimes be dysfunctional. In physical realm, gamers put on weight because of immobility. They hardly leave their rooms and get lost to the outside world. It's easy for gaming to become an obsession that turns into an addiction. What's more difficult is to remember and do the most important thing: keep the fantasy and reality in balance. Till recent, us psychiatrists did not have enough data to analyze gaming behavior. But we have started to see the impact of modern world gaming. It's blurring the boundaries of fantasy and reality, leading to isolation, anxiety, depression, psychotic breakdowns, lack of social skills, and poor coping mechanisms. I was a gamer once. Back in the 80s, I was hooked on to this video game called Atari. Has anybody heard of it? But soon after, within a few months, I lost interest. And apparently, I wasn't the only one. In mid-80s, gaming industry crashed. That was known as the Atari shock. So for that company, Atari, the revenues plunged from $3.2 billion to a mere $100 million in a matter of 2 years. That's 95% loss of revenue. That was the first and the last time that the gaming industry took a hit, and it promised never to again. So what they changed, they brought in new game designs. They incorporated algorithms from casinos, brought concepts like fun failures, hierarchy of stages, and clan cultures that maximize time commitment, which leads to marathon gaming. In order to hook people more, players can have customized characters where they have an opportunity to become what they are not: small and feeble in reality, big and powerful in fantasy. During a pinnacle stage of my psychiatric training, I decided to go back to gaming, so I bought my PlayStation 3. And just like the 12-year-old Jordan, I got hooked onto it straight away. I lost track of time. For the first weekend, I played for about 24 hours in 2 days. The next day, I felt completely wasted. The subsequent week, I felt that it was taking over my life. So I packed it up and donated it to a charity. I must admit, it took a lot of strength to pack my obsession and addiction in a box and give it away. But I'm glad I did, though. Or I may not have finished my training. I realized at a very early stage to keep the fantasy and reality in balance. Unfortunately, not many people are able to do that, and the gaming industry thrives on that obsession. Now, since PlayStation 3, gaming industry has become one of the biggest industries globally, with an annual revenue of $300 billion and still growing. It's bigger than Hollywood, Bollywood, and cable television together. Yeah. Today, I'm going to share the 3 most significant impacts of modern day gaming. Firstly, game thrombosis. Have you heard the term? I thought so. In 2012, a young boy was marathon gaming for about 40 hours with inadequate sleep, poor hydration, and food. Soon after stopping, he collapsed and died of a clot in his lungs. During the COVID lockdown in the UK, a 24-year-old football coach got hooked onto gaming, and he started playing for 7 to 8 hours on end. He felt unwell one day. He got up, collapsed, and died of a clot in his lungs. Immobility, lack of hydration, poor sleep, and stress led to his death. There's a trend of marathon gaming all around the world amongst clans. It's more so in Far East, where they can hire gaming cafes for weeks on end. There are reported deaths globally because of marathon gaming due to game thrombosis. If you are a gamer, please remember to keep the fantasy and reality in balance. Secondly, gaming freakouts. Have you heard the term? No. You may have seen the viral video of gamers made by their friends and family getting hundreds and thousands of views, likes, and comments. In those videos, the gamer is shown to be in a distressed state after losing a stage. He's thrashing television, screaming aloud, bouts of uncontrollable rage and anger, headbutting walls. Usually between the ages of 11 to 18 years of age. For a lot of people, that's a source of amusement. For me as a psychiatrist, it's a big source of concern. It's so important to keep the fantasy and reality in balance. Thirdly, the rise of the cult. In a bizarre true story, two sisters became obsessed with a character, a fictional character called the Angel of Death. So the Angel of Death used to go to the forest, used to kill people by taking their organs out and leaving them to die. So they decided to fulfill his legacy through them and just agreed to become the proxy. They lured a young girl to go into the forest with them. They stabbed her 19 times before leaving her to die in the forest. When interrogated, they said, "It was the Angel of Death. We were just the proxy." Creepy, isn't it? Very disturbing at the same time. So why is it that people become so immersed in this fantasy world that they forget about reality or what's real? Well, there's a social learning theory based on observation learning. A famous psychologist, Andrew Bandura, he did an interesting experiment called the Bobo doll experiment, where he exposed young children to violent and non-violent scenarios and concluded that those who were exposed to violent scenarios express more aggressive behavior. This forms the basis of learning violence from television, from gaming, and our surrounding, and it's not just limited to children, it's adults as well. So, these behaviors, have they got a biological basis? Well, imaging studies have revealed that exposure to violence or playing violence games, it shuts off the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive part of the brain, and it proliferates the desire center, which is the limbic system. There are also studies that have documented that exposure to excessive gaming actually leads to thinning of the gray matter of the brain. Some people will say that these behaviors can be described as addiction behaviors, which can be similar to drugs and alcohol, right? Well, it is right. It can be addiction, but Philip Zimbardo, of the Stanford prison experiment fame, has a different take on it. He says, in drugs and alcohol addiction, you want more of the same thing. In gaming addiction or any behavioral addiction, you want novelty, newness, and excitement. It's called the arousal addiction. World Health Organization, International Classification of Diseases, ICD, and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, all acknowledge the impact of excessive gaming on well-being. It is a global problem. Countries like South Korea, China, Taiwan, and Japan, they have introduced Cinderella laws. They have brought in legislations, created hundreds of treatment centers, and they have fined parents who allow children to play outside the social hours. That brings to the bigger question. How many treatment centers do we have in the UK? Almost none. And how can we help the situation? Well, it's not just the government's responsibility. It's the ethical responsibility of the gaming industry as well. Parents, institutions, and individuals to acknowledge the issues and highlight the problems so that provisions are put in place to help those who love gaming. I must admit that gaming is a pleasurable experience. I was a gamer, I know how it feels, but excessive gaming can be detrimental to health. It blurs the boundaries between fantasy and reality. I'll end this by narrating a story of a teenager who, after marathon gaming for 18 hours of a cult classic, decided to jump himself, to throw himself from a high riser. In a note left, he said, I'm going to join the fallen heroes of the game. Sadly, this is a true story. Sadly, he did not keep a balance between fantasy and reality. Gaming disorder is real. Gaming addiction is real. We should help gamers or those who love games to differentiate between what is fantasy and what is real. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Culhane. But 2 years of hard work, and it's over in 4 hours. It's quite an interesting experience. Today, we've had a list of speakers who provided us with a lens into tomorrow. Whether it was mental health, whether it was starting a business, whether it was cryptocurrencies and the way they can solve some of the biggest economical issues that we face. When applying for a TEDx license, there's a very, very important part of the application, and it's the theme. The theme is what plays host to the ideas, not the stage. And many organizers would look to famous figures in history, a quote from a book they love, an author. But I consider myself incredibly lucky to have found inspiration in an example a lot closer to me. When it comes to the man on the screen, there's something all of us in this room have in common. None of us ever knew him. His name is Hud Osman Bibay. He was my grandfather. He died when my father was only 2 years old. He came from a tiny village in Kosovo called Ladrovce, in a tiny town called Malishiv, in a tiny country called Kosovo. And I can only say one thing about my grandfather, and that is that he was utterly obsessed with tomorrow. And it was evident in the decisions and actions that he took. And I hope you'll forgive me for being selfish for just a second to tell you a little bit about my story and how we've ended up here today. There was a time in Kosovo, where I'm from originally, where warring families was the status quo. Society was dominated by blood feuds that had lasted for so long, and nobody even knew where from. The only thing that we knew was over that hill, we're not welcome. And from that hill, they are not welcome. Why? We don't ask why. But a time came in Kosovo where we needed to band together for a common aim, for our freedom, for our liberty. And the warring families had no place in what would be a united front against the common aggressor. My grandfather took it upon himself, along with many other elders in Kosovo, to go to these warring villages, bring together the elders and sit them down on a table. And he would say a phrase every time. Tomorrow, your kids will thank you for what you've done today. Tomorrow, the sun will shine a little bit brighter than it did today. Tomorrow, you'll be able to go over that hill as a friend and not a foe. And it was this community-backed, sincere campaign which brought together and homogenized a response amongst the Kosovan people. My grandfather never took payment for what he did. He considered his job a responsibility to his motherland. He then continued with his theme throughout his life of thinking about tomorrow. He did something incredibly unorthodox and moved his family after he married my grandmother from Ladrovce to that one city you can see in big writing, Pristina, the capital city. Again, with the thought that tomorrow my kids would grow up in a place better suited to the capacities that they will inevitably have. Better opportunities would await them tomorrow. And it's an interesting story, actually. You see, one day, in August 1975, my grandfather called upon my eldest uncle, Miljan Bibay. My grandfather was utterly in love with horses. He kept horses all the time. He adored them. And he said, let's go to the market and buy some horse food. And they went. They got to the market, got off, and in typical Kosovan fashion, one of his dear friends approached him and said, Hud, how are you? My grandfather stared at him, also put his hand on his heart and said, Hud is no more. And he passed away. I'd like to think that in that moment, when he realized finally his journey into tomorrow had come to an end, he was so content with the version of tomorrow that others would succeed, that he greeted death with such dignity and honor that it moves me to this day. It dictates every decision that I make, every step that I take, and it is the inspiration for the event today. And when you see the result, I mean, you can't consider him an optimist. At the end of a big event, hosts tend to like to leave the audience with a thought that they'll take away, something that will make them think, could be a big moment in history sometimes, you know, a saying, a speech, a line from a famous speech that's changed the world. I think, with the thought of destination tomorrow, there is a phrase that I'd like to use. It's also quite unorthodox. It's one that we probably say every day, numerous times. We've probably said it thousands of times in our lives, and yet today it makes more sense than ever before, for me. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to you, the audience, for coming today. Thank you to the inspirational speakers and the stories you've provided us. Thank you to Anna, to Rafi, to Sophia, for working on this amazing project. And at the end, all that's left to say is, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go out of the host mode. Hi guys, how's it going? You have a survey to fill out at the back of your sheet. It's very important that you do that for us, okay? It really helps us in terms of future events. Of course, thank you so much for being very patient, and I hope you enjoyed the talks. Food is still waiting for you. Please come outside, continue networking. We'd love to have a chat with you guys. Thank you all for coming. It's been a great event. Thank you. Thank you.